Washington and Spokane voters are famously independent, voting for the person and not the party. Voters want to know the person behind the policy. Join host Sulani Madsen as she interviews 2016 primary and general election candidates for local, state, and federal office on the experiences that have shaped their lives. Now, here's your host, Sulani.
Welcome to Meet the Candidate, and today's guest is Paul Addis, who is a candidate for Lieutenant Governor. And I'm going to give Paul an opportunity to introduce himself to everyone.
All right. Well, it's great to be here, and we just had the Lieutenant Governor debate in Spokane yesterday. So
it was very interesting to listen to.
Great to show up here at the studios to do this show, and I'd like to tell the voters in Washington a little bit about myself and why I'm running. I'm actually running as a third party, as a libertarian candidate.
There's 11 candidates. I think there's more than 3 parties involved at this point.
Yes, there are. I think there's one more independent, I think. And so the reason I'm running for lieutenant governor is I think the lieutenant governor is ideally suited for a third party candidate because the lieutenant governor's primary job is president of the Senate. And in that capacity, the lieutenant governor acts as sort of a referee for debate on the Senate floor. And I think, as every sports fan knows, it's best if the referee isn't playing for one of the teams. So I think I could do a fair job there. And as well, the lieutenant governor is on the Economic Development and International Relations Board. And so that's something I'm familiar with, and that I've worked on and done business on multiple continents. And being a free market advocate as I am, I think it's important to understand and respect the different cultures to make Washington a place that's welcoming to business from all over. And I think that the business and the free market can really help us with a lot of the issues that we have around Washington State. So that's, I think, the lieutenant governor is not really an issues-driven position in the sense of the lieutenant governor doesn't author or sponsor or co-sponsor any specific legislation. It's more of a mediator and a gatekeeper for the legislation in the Senate.
And you did hint at it. I'm not focusing on party on these interviews, but you are a prefers libertarian candidate, which goes along with being that third party mediator kind of thing. So what are some key interesting things about your education that the voters might want to know?
Well, I went to in high school. I went to 3 public high schools and 1 private high school. The private high school, small Christian high school, I went to in south of Atlanta, Georgia. My mother, who was a single parent raising 3 kids at the time, couldn't afford the tuition at the school, so I actually cleaned the school, the bathrooms and the classrooms to pay my way through my senior year of high school. So when it comes to education, I've seen a lot of variety in the different public schools and private schools, and having to work my way through to pay for my education, even as a senior in high school, taught me a lot of life lessons, I think, in that, and a lot of responsibility, which I think served me well throughout my life and work and furthering my education. I graduated with a bachelor's in business administration and management from Georgia State University, and I also went to 6 colleges, some of it while I was in the military, and finished up in my 30s. So it was a long 6-college trek to my degree.
Yeah, I certainly have known lots of people who have made that long trek. It does show some perseverance. So you mentioned you were in the military. That's certainly a key life experience. When did you join, and what did you do?
Well, I was in for 4 years, from 1990 to 1994. I was in Army intelligence. It was an interesting story. I actually went in to become a radio maintainer in the Signal Corps, but and this was another interesting thing about the education idea. When you go in the military, you take a big test to get into the military, and they rate you and figure out how you would do it.
Kind of an aptitude test.
And when I went in, I went to basic training, arrived there with about 200 people in my group. They took 20 of us out of the group at basic training and said, based on a certain section of the test, you should have an aptitude to learn a language. So they sent us to take another test called the Defense Language Aptitude Battery, or DLAB. And from that group of 20, they picked me out and said, you've scored well enough on this test that we will like to offer you a job to learn another language and be in intelligence, to listen, a cryptologic linguist, to listen in to other people talking on the radios, basically, and translate it. So what was interesting about that, and now when I look back on it, is that how they were able to, through their testing, figure out who had what aptitudes and really focus on the strengths instead of what I think a lot of schools do for our kids is to focus on the weakness and say, well, you're weak at this, so we need to really focus on that and try and make you better at that versus focusing on the strengths.
Nurturing the strengths.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's a much better way, and I ended up in a job that I had natural aptitude for and did well. So it was interesting to go through that process and see how it worked and realize that, I think that's a good way to go, to actually focus on the strengths and not necessarily think that every child or a person has the same aptitude, should have the same scores on tests, let's say, as everybody else. That we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we should, I think, nurture the strengths a little more sometimes than the weaknesses.
That's really a fascinating idea to follow up on for public education. Haven't thought of it that way. So you were in for 4 years and must have served in some different parts of the country or parts of the world.
I did. My last duty station, I'm from Georgia originally. I've been here in Washington for 8 years now. January will be, so 7.5 years. My last duty station was at Fort Lewis before they had joined the two.
Before it was JBLM.
Right.
Yeah.
And so actually when I was here, I didn't get up to Seattle too much because we were on base, and back then it seemed like a long distance to go to that area up to Seattle. But now I'm loving it. I live in Kent, Washington, which is not far from Seattle. I work for Alaska Airlines, and I'm loving it here in Washington.
That's cool. I just have to ask, what languages?
It was Korean. So I was listening in on the North Koreans. That was my job, which is interesting because in the Army, really, when you're not at war, although it seems nowadays we're always at war with somebody, but back then when you're not at war, most people are just training for the job they would do if they were at war, whereas the intelligence people, we would be listening in at all times.
Yeah.
We would do the same thing in war or peace at that point. So it was I guess interesting to do a job that you do in war pieces.
Yeah. Well, South Korea is a major trading partner, so that could even potentially be a useful language as Lieutenant Governor.
I learned a lot. They had some good friends in the Korean Army, and I learned a lot about the culture.
Oh. Well, so what made you decide to run for public office?
Well, we are self-governing in this country. I used to be a Republican and was just voted for president, basically. Whenever we'd vote when the vote came up, and didn't really get that involved when I was growing up. But coming out here to Washington and Washington seems to be a little more, the culture seems to be a little more, I would say, I want to say this derogatory towards anybody else, but it seems a very literate and activist and passionate community in Washington State where people really do get involved. And so I heard some, different opinions from different areas and looked into things myself and decided I felt that maybe the government was overreaching in a lot of areas and felt that was not the role of government. So with more research I did, I thought if somebody, if I tell somebody in my neighborhood, oh, this is a good way to do government, and even if they agree with me, if they go to vote and there's nobody on the ballot that agrees with that philosophy, for them it practically doesn't exist. So if I'm going to ask people to agree with me on a political philosophy, it'd be best if I am on the ballot or somebody that believes in that same limited government philosophy was on the ballot. Otherwise, it's really impractical to tell anybody about it.
We've used two parties as shorthand for a long time, so you're advocating for being a little more explicit about what that political philosophy is. Right.
Seeing what the others stand for. I think this is something new for a lot of people, but I think it's old in the American tradition. So,
Well, just a brief question about special talents and insights. That's a question I'm going to be asking candidates, but I think that the Korean connection is actually a pretty special talent and insight. You've got family with you in Kent, and
my wife of 18 years, Kathy, who is a home health nurse, a registered nurse at Providence Home Health, and she's also an ordained minister. So we do some work in nonprofit humanitarian work over in East Africa. It's to me, the only justifiable ends to politics is people, and it's the same way with just about everything I do. And, the work that we do over in Africa is about the people, and we've come to know them and love them. We go visit over there and look at the work being done, and so it's all kind of rolls into the same thing. It's concern for people.
That gives you a little broader perspective too than that travel.
Right.
Yeah, it's easier to put first world problems in perspective sometimes when you've actually seen real problems.
Yes, it does.
Well, we're coming up on our 2-minute warning, and so if there's some a message that you'd like to get out there? We want to provide more information for the voters, and what would you like to tell people about why they should vote for you?
Sure. Well, again, my belief that the best way to manage a complex system like a political system is to decentralize and push the decision-making out to the most local and individual level. For that reason, I'm committing to donate $2,000 of my monthly salary, if elected, to two charities, Year Up, which is an organization that helps low-income young adults 18 to 24 get hands-on skill development and college credits and corporate internships, and also the Bread of Life Mission in Pioneer Square in Seattle, which helps men and women break the cycle of homelessness through a faith-based recovery model. And I'm doing that because I believe if the community knows best how to solve the problems of the community, and if the money is kept in the community, it's best spent in and by the community. So that exemplifies my philosophy.
You're kind of pledging to a tithe of your salary
back
to the community.
To do what I think is the best way to handle these issues.
Okay. Now, you have a website, I'm sure, someplace.
I do. It's Addis 4LG, ADDIS, the number 4, LG for Lieutenant Governor.com. So Addis4LG.com.
Okay, and I'm going to write that down after. We'll make sure we get it connected to our website as well. So this has been really an interesting conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. One of the things about candidates, every candidate I've ever interviewed is really has a story to tell and has a reason why they really want to get into public service. I appreciate you coming to tell your story.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Paul.
Meet the Candidate is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. All Meet the Candidate conversations are posted on our YouTube channel, posted as a podcast on our website, and will be featured in our 24/7 live stream. Find us at SpokaneTalksOnline.com.